Good afternoon, and welcome to the session on Visual Studio Code. In this session today, we want to go a little bit deeper of what Visual Studio Code can do, and also go a little bit broader to show the full spectrum of its capabilities. And I must really say we had an amazing 24 hours, right? So he almost killed us with tweets, lots of feedback requests we got. But let me ask you, how many of you have downloaded code? Good. Those that don't have downloaded code, please stand up. No, it's okay. It's okay. Now, you see, we made it number one on Hacker News for almost 12 hours, which was a boy dream of mine. No, I always wondered, what do I have to do to stay one day on Hacker News, right? What else can you dream of? Lots of suggestions, lots of smiles, and very interesting, lots of non-Windows downloads, right? 50% of the downloads are non-Windows. So let's start. What and why did we build Visual Studio Code? So there is this spectrum and continuum, right? There's the editors on one side, there are IDEs on the other side. And at the time I worked on Eclipse, it was very clear, right? The pendulum is on the side of IDEs. Lots of effort in IDEs. Everybody was happy in IDEs. What we saw is over time now, it's more balanced, right? There are people that just like to do editors. And it's actually understandable why, because editors are lightweight and fast. They're very focused on coding, right? And developers like speed. Whatever makes it productive is a good thing. Simple model, files and folders. Many languages, right? Which is important if you do web development. New languages pop up, whatever, and the editors, they're really tuned for that. They allow you to make it easy to get some coloring, some syntax support for a new language. They're really good at that. They're also really good at workflows, right? Because they don't try to cover the full workflow because they work in conjunction with the command line. They support the workflow you like, which also is a nice characteristic. And also very typical, also for productivity, editors are highly keyboard-centered. However, there are also IDEs. And IDEs have also lots of strength. Like, they really know about your code in a project system. They're very strong when it comes to understand your code. They give you IntelliSense, they give you refactoring, all this deep knowledge of the code. They give you debugging. Who doesn't want that, right? They have an integrated build system, incremental, whatever. They have file new wizards, file new to create scaffold new code. They have wizards all over for doing almost anything. They have designers, they have ALM integration, and they have platform tools. So in this spectrum, now where do we want to be? And I would say we kind of want to be close to an editor, but a little bit more. And a little bit more should really cover what is needed for the central code edit debug cycle. So from the editor, we want to take over the lightweight and fast. Who doesn't like that? Files and folders, but with some project context, right? If you want to provide something like refactoring or to find old references, you need to have some project context of the scope. Which files actually are part of what I'm working on? You want to keep the many languages. You want to keep the keyboard-centeredness. And you want to add from the IDEs code understanding, because that's what we like. We like IntelliSense. We like refactoring. I'd hate to go back. What's kind of an addition to other editors, we'd like to have the debugger integrate in the editor, because that's part of my core in the loop as a developer day to day. So that's why it's in there. And rather than having an integrated build system, we just allow you a loose integration of running tasks. And the task can run a build, can run tests, can do deployment. So it's very loose. And we also demo that later on, what we mean by that. So in summary, Visual Studio Code should give you a new choice of tool. If you're more editor-centric, if you're more one of the editor guys, it should have the simplicity of a code editor, the speed of a code editor, but it should be enrich an editor to cover the code edit debug cycle. Okay, that's basically where we want to be. Now let's open up the box, what's in Visual Studio Code, and we will show you that all in action. So we support runtimes. Today we support Node.js and ASP.NET version 5. We will show demo for each of them, so you can see what we cover of these runtimes. And then we have this kind of 3 level of language support. Right? You want to have breadth of languages. And of course, we cannot cover all at the same richness level, at least for the preview. So we have several languages and many languages at the basic level. Basic level means you get syntax coloring, bracket matching, smart indenting, all this kind of stuff, and we cover many languages on that. If you go one level up on the stairway to heaven, we get to the better languages. And these languages, for these languages, we understand the structure, the semantics, right? There's an AST behind so that we can give you IntelliSense, that we can give you an outline, that we can validate what you write, the code you write, and that's kind of the better languages. And then on the top are kind of the best languages, and these are the languages for which we have the project context, like we know which files are part of what you're working on. For this reason, we can do find all references, or we can do something like a rename refactoring, right? And currently, the languages in this level are C# and TypeScript, but what we hope over time, of course, you want to see that all languages climb up the stairway to heaven, and we have them all at the best level. But of course, it's clear we can do that all. What's key for doing that is we need to open up code to have an extensibility story, which we haven't ready for preview. So you have to wait a little bit for that. When it comes to inner loop, my day-to-day work as a developer, source control is part of that, right? I want to review what is the change I'm about to commit to my team. For this reason, we have a source control integrated into the editor. You see change bars. You see also incoming, outgoing changes from team. And that's currently for Git. For task running, we support Gulp. Grunt didn't make the cut for the preview. OK. How did you build it? So we didn't build it from scratch. We stand off the shoulders of proven technologies. And the first technology that we stand upon is Electron. And GitHub has developed a framework, a shell, for running native applications on a desktop that use web technology that was formerly called Atom Shell. And we leveraged that. We found that fits our needs very well and also has a lot of responsiveness, right? So when you make a pull request against Electron, it gets responded to. It was very, very good open source energy there. Electron or GitHub and the whole Atom surrounding has other technologies that allow us that we leverage, like Squirrel for application updates. So we have an automatic application update system built into code. So when we push changes, we plan to do that every 3 weeks. You will get them automatically, so which gives us an opportunity to really share the best features with you, right, as you want them. So that's Squirrel. We also use FirstMate, which should allow us to very easily integrate a new language for the editor. As I said, we want to go for breadth, both for breadth and depth. For instance, yesterday, in Hacker News, someone asked for Rust. It took me 10 minutes to find a TextMate bundle and to install it and to get Rust coloring and indenting and so on support. OK. So what's behind Electron? Well, it's based on web technology. So you write your app in HTML, CSS, JavaScript. As you know by now, the whole code is written in TypeScript. So it's a large one of the larger TypeScript applications. And behind it, the technology is Chromium and Node.js. Okay, that was a very good fit for the technology we had. And what's also a very good fit, it's cross-platform. Right? So that's why Electron is a very good fit for us. So now let's go one level up. That was kind of the basic framework. One level up, it should be no surprise that we need an editor. And fortunately, we worked on an editor since quite a while. Right? The Monaco editor, we started working on that around 4 years ago when I joined Microsoft. And what we tried to do when we built this editor, we said we want to be very aggressive when it comes to dog fooding. So whatever we do, we'd like to use only the tool we built as our development environment. And after 4 months, actually, we were there, which means for almost more than 3 years, we consume our own dog food when it comes to the editor. So it's not the first appearance of the editor, right? It was already available in Visual Studio Online Monaco, which is available since a year, which allows you to edit websites on Azure to get a live editing experience. And this was really great for us. Now we got feedback on what's the UI, and people really liked the lightweight UI. That was really nice. We also run into some limitations, right? People want to C# code, C# support, managed code support, which we found was very hard to do in a cost-effective way for a website. Actually, today, the code base, we have one code base for both Visual Studio Online Monaco and for Code, which is quite a challenge from time to time. The editor was not only used in Monaco, we have other kind of opportunities to shake out the quality of the editor. Internet Explorer 11, the debugger, uses the editor for code viewing. So what we learned there is how to really render long lines efficiently, right? Because you looked at minified code in the debugger. That was a great experience. OneDrive. OneDrive is also using us. What we learned there is we have to deal with languages like with Hebrew, with bidirectionality and so on. So it was another good hurdle, a challenge to overcome. Was really good. And we also are used in Visual Studio Online, where we learned a lot about making diffing fast and so on. So what you see, basically, this editor has that is at the core of our code environment had quite some mileage. And it was really battle tested, and we spent a lot of time on tuning it, improving it, and making it fast. So the Monaco editor is actually more than just a text editor. It really has this idea of make coding good, right? For this reason, you have a UI framework, a UI infrastructure in there that allows you to get a good coding experience, right? We have IntelliSense there, go to symbol in file, go to any symbol, parameter hints, and so on. Inline references, errors is another important thing. And the idea is if we give this UI framework, we can achieve consistency across many languages. Okay, and I hope we show you that in the demo. Now what's missing is we have an editor, we have UI framework for nice coding productivity features. What we need is the brain that feeds these features, right? And also there, we stand off on the shoulders of giants, right? On one hand side, we have TypeScript, which recently made a TypeScript server available. I will show you the architecture in a second. So we leverage that to use and give the TypeScript support, the brain for TypeScript. So when you ask IntelliSense in code, it's a TypeScript server that will answer it. Similarly, when it comes to C#, we leverage there the OmniSharp Roslyn implementation, which is kind of OmniSharp has two versions, right? One was with N based on N refactor, and the most recent one which really leverages Roslyn. And we also leverage that. Now, when I say leverage, that means, of course, you're not just consumers, right? So we really actively submit pull requests to both of them. And have developer both work on TypeScript, kind of almost full-time, and one on OmniSharp Roslyn full-time. So it's really a pull request-based give and take culture. So how do we run this? So we have what we call a tool service architecture, which means we don't run all the code inside the code renderer process or the code process. Some of the services run out of process. There are several benefits of that. First of all, of course, you can write the language service in a different language than code itself. Code is written in TypeScript. But if you want to leverage C# or Roslyn, of course, you need to have some cross-language, needs to come over the boundary, right? And the way we do that is we run the OmniSharp server out of process, and it uses a simple JSON protocol to communicate with the core code. The same with the TypeScript server, and interestingly see, this gives us freedom of choice when it comes to technology. OmniSharp is using implement in C# with ASP.NET 5 as the runtime. The TypeScript service is implemented in TypeScript with Node.js as the runtime. We use the same infrastructure also for debugging, which is less about giving a brain for the tool. It's more about adapting the debuggers that exist to conform to a protocol that we can show then in our UI. So if one common UI that can work with any debugger, and you have this out-of-process adapters that help us to communicate with existing debuggers, right? We have the Node.js-based debugger, and we have one for Mono that we saw in the keynote yesterday. OK, there is a protocol behind that, but let me skip that and rather switch over to showing things in action. And in the first demo, I'd like to get John Papa on stage, and he will show us the Node, JavaScript, and Angular in action. We met John about 3 or 4 weeks ago. So Scott Guthrie, after a review of code, he mentioned we should really get some external feedback. And we said, why? Right? We dog food in it day in, day out. It's just a distraction. And it turned out John wasn't a distraction, even more so when we found out that he's not just a programmer, Visual Studio user, right? He is a person that tries out any editor that is around, and he knows the shortcuts, key bindings for all the editors. I don't know whether you still do that, and what's even cool, he learned the key bindings for code as well. So he spent about 2 or 3 weeks full-time with code, gave us a list with 100 items what you have to improve, and yeah, made a lot of work. And I think we got so good feedback, they said, why don't you come on stage and show it rather than us, right? So John, why don't you start?
Great, thanks, Eric. So when they started talking to me about using code and what it could offer, it was really interesting to me because since I was at Microsoft several years ago, about 4 years ago, I've been a Visual Studio programmer for, I don't even know how long it's been out, well over a decade. And then I moved over to doing a lot of OS X work on a Mac, and I needed to figure out what I was going to do with all these different languages that I was thrown at. So I bounced from there to WebStorm, to Brackets, to Sublime, to Atom. I was all over the place with editors and IDEs trying to figure out how was I going to make this work, even IntelliJ. And I've been landing and trying all these things differently. And I started using code, figuring out what's the best pieces that I could get out of those. And the reason I bounced around was because none of them were exactly what I wanted. So let me show you something that I do a lot at work. I use a lot of Node.js. And if you hear JavaScript programmers, a lot of people, great, awesome. Love my JavaScript. So inside of this project here, I've actually downloaded the hot towel generator, which you can grab off the net. And once I install the project, I get a basic application running. Code opens it up, things look pretty good. I've got this.
Yeah, actually, the name of the template made a lot of fun in team. Hot towel became a standard term in the team, right?
Hot towel?
Oh, this doesn't work in hot towel. So
You can thank Ward Bell for the name on that one.
Okay.
That was a good one. So we have a nice application running Node. And out of the box, the first thing I noticed when I opened this, and I talked to Eric, said, it's no good. It's got green squiggly lines inside of my app. What does that mean? Well, you start hovering over it, and I'm looking at a Node process, right? And it can't find that process. So one of the first things I wanted to do was be able to use what's baked into the application. So I can hit the little light bulb right there, or I can hit Command dot, and up there it says, ooh, I can add a reference to the node.d.ts file. Now, I'm not using TypeScript. I'm using JavaScript. So this was pretty cool to me. I'm like, all right, let me pull that down and see what happens. And what's actually happened here is I put a reference into this DTS file, a definitely typed file, which it got off of GitHub on the internet.
right.
And now, if I come down and I start typing something in, like let's say var e equals, it's a terrible variable name, process dot, and I start typing env, I'm getting IntelliSense. I'm getting full completion on anything that Node can or can't do there. So that works great for me. So I can type something in like require, and I've got a little code snippet, and I can type in HTTP, and now I can do HTTP dot, and I get the get syntax right in here as well.
So where is this coming from, right? The node.t.ts is this type definition file for the Node library. It includes all the static types of the Node modules, the built-in modules. And what we do is, since JavaScript is TypeScript, we can leverage these .t.ts files also for JavaScript development, right? That's what we're doing. And we benefit from all these 800 typings that are available on definitely typed on the GitHub repository.
And there are tons of them up there in that repo. So that's great for Node modules. But what about modules that I write? Like I've got this really awesomely named 404 module that I wrote to help do 404 handling. There's actually a file over here, and you can see there's just a plain old module, and I've got some methods in it like send 404. So if I'm inside of my application, and I'm right here, and I want to highlight over the 404, you can see I've got syntax highlighting and IntelliSense for that as well. So it knows, if I scroll down, where I'm actually using my 404 right there, I can actually see that I've got the send 404 method, and it's got all the parameters in there.
So the challenge, of course, now if you do IntelliSense, if you want to have multi-file experience, right? So how do we know that there is another file around? And there we do a small trick, right, if you scroll up quickly. So basically what we do behind the scenes, we massage this statement, this require function call, into an import statement before we give it to TypeScript. And in this way, TypeScript knows, oh, you reference this other module, and this is how the exported functions come in over, right? But again, we stand on the shoulders of TypeScript. We leverage as much as possible from the infrastructure. Also, when it comes to code validation, right, that's actually TypeScript that validates. There's a TypeScript AST behind it that we use for validating the code. And if you do kind of, let's try to type one, or environment, just type. And then the nice thing is the TypeScript AST is annotated, which language features var I number, right? Colon number, colon number. Right, and if you see the error now, it will tell you don't use TypeScript's language constraints JavaScript. Right? So there isn't a TypeScript AST behind it, but the AST nodes are annotated which ones are TypeScript and which ones are JavaScript. So that's how we leverage that.
And that's pretty cool. What I really like about this, too, is sometimes I forget that I'm actually still in JavaScript because I'm getting all the goodness of TypeScript without actually having to know much about TypeScript. So that's pretty cool. So I'm looking at all this, and that's great, but what if I want to start to get into debugging my application? So first, let's get rid of that bad code I just wrote. We'll do that. Now, I've got my application here, and I want to debug. Let's say I have a routes file. So one thing I can do is do some quick keyboard actions, open up a routing file. I can put a breakpoint right there on my response of get people. And now I've got to be able to run my app. So I could show you I could run this through basic JavaScript and launch the server with Node, but I like to use gulp. And I like to use processes. So I've got some tasks in a gulp file. I can show you that real quick. And I can look through here, and I can say, all right, I've got this function called serve, which is going to serve up my application. And inside of there, I've got debugging options that I'm setting. So that's all great, but what if I want to go back to my routes file and set a breakpoint? So I'm over here, got a breakpoint. First thing I'm going to do is run my gulp task. So I just say gulp serve dev. That's my application's task. It's going to run it over on the right-hand side. Up pops my window. There's my application. Looks good, but I'm not debugging quite yet. So I'm back over here, and now I can go to the debugging pane, and I can attach to the currently running process. So now I can go from there to there. We'll make a little more window room, and let's get rid of that guy. And now if I go from admin to dashboard, it's going to get the people, and now I'm sitting here at the debugger. So let me open that up, and now we can actually go back to the debugging window. And there's quite a bit in there. I can look at the data, at the people. Here's my closure. I can examine what's in that array. And I can check out the objects that are in there. And I can step through, and you can step over, and you can stop the processes.
So what's behind the scene, right? So it's multi-process. The debugger adapter, which we can write in Node, runs in a separate process and uses the V8 debugger protocol to actually expose this debugging infrastructure John just showed us. And maybe also you show the configuration, how you configure debugging, because that's a pattern if you hit the wheel. So basically, now we try to not have wizards in the IDE, or in the editor, sorry, the editor. Because now we think we're programmers, we like to deal with code. Right? And JSON is a good way to write code, so we do lots of the configuration of the editor in just JSON files. So settings, launch configuration settings, key bindings, combinations. That's all done in JSON files, but these JSON files have a schema behind it. So if you hover over some stuff, right, we'll tell you what things are. And you also get IntelliSense, right? So actually, if you do IntelliSense somewhere, right, you get IntelliSense about what's in the schema for this JSON file. So that's how we make kind of the configurations more code-alike. Right?
So it's like a snippet built right into it.
Even that, yes. So that's the whole point, right? We'd like to not have wizards, whatever, but we give you the configuration power with code and IntelliSense.
And that's great. And one thing you may have noticed is I'm trying to learn the keystrokes as I go around, because, yeah, you can go through the menu items and do all this fun stuff, but what's nice is, you know, I want to make room on my screen. I can open and close the sidebar with a quick Command-B on my keyboard. If I want to run a task, you saw me open up the task window through a palette right here, through a custom key binding that I created. You may notice, too, very tiny in the bottom left-hand corner, I've got a task running. That's what that little spinning bars going on down there. And I can go ahead and open the tasks. I can run them. So I can run a new task if I want to. I'm up here. And then when I go back to my application, I can actually terminate the task. And now the wheel stops spinning through a key binding. All this is being done through the keyboard, and I'm using this through commands that are actually available through the command palette. So if you've done Sublime, this is basically where that palette comes from. And I can type in commands like reload my window. This is just a browser, so it reloads everything for me. Or I can get rid of the little caret there, and I can say just find a file, like my gulp file. And I can go open that up. I can also look for symbols. You saw me look for that serve before. So I open this up, and I can type in serve, and I'll just type in S, and you can see the different things that it's finding inside my file for me, which is finding different functions in this case. I can even categorize them by functions or variables with a colon. And if you ever forget what these are, if you just delete those and put a question mark in, it tells you right there what are those commands and how do I access them, which is super helpful as you're trying to get around really fast in an application. So this is all great, and this is Node, but any of you here do any Angular development? I know I love it, so I wanted to try this out in an Angular application. So let's go flip over to there for a minute. I told Eric I was going to try to only use the keyboard, so I'm going to try to commit to that. So I could navigate over here and try to find my files, but that's kind of a waste of time. I'm going to go up here instead, and I'll look for a file called dashboard controller. So here's my Angular controller, and I can find this stuff, and I've got these green squigglies over here too. It doesn't know what Angular is. Or I could open up my data service file. Same thing here. So if I type in Angular, let's go to a new one here, Angular dot, I'm not getting any good IntelliSense here. These are other things. It's not really finding the right thing. So instead, what I can do is say, all right, we'll use that little light bulb again, and it's going to pull down for me Angular IntelliSense.
You see the red squiggle while it's being downloaded. Once it's downloaded, the red squiggle will go away because the file is here, and you get IntelliSense. Yeah.
So now I can type in Angular. We'll do module, and we'll create the module. And I'm going to call this Dan Wallin. And then I'll create a controller. And there's my controller syntax. I forgot how those things are named. So I'll call that one Ward Bell's outfit. And then I can create a function over here. And I'm good to go on my stuff. So it's really cool because maybe I didn't like that Angular syntax for the controller. And instead, I can go right here again, and I can see there are 3 different signatures for a controller. I can pass in the name and the function, or just the name, and then an any, or you can just pass in an object if you'd like to as well. So it gives me all these different options that I can use. And then let's say I'm not using Angular. Let's say I'm using GASP, jQuery. And I go, all right, I want to create a click handler here on something called table. And I forget, because it's been literally 3 years since I've done jQuery, what that syntax looks like. Well, I'm not getting any IntelliSense. It knows that the $sign is going to be jQuery. So I can hit that up there. It adds my reference. And now, let's get rid of click for a minute. Hit the dot. And now you can see I've got the IntelliSense for click as well.
Why don't we go to the definition of either Angular or dollar that we can quickly show the DTS file?
OK.
So that's the Control F12, right? And then you see now we Angular.d.ts, and this really shows nicely the full power of TypeScript, how we can actually, after the fact, type a library in a way that really captures its semantics, right? Using interfaces, using optional properties of interface, and so on. It's very powerful, right? And TypeScript really shines when it comes to type existing JavaScript code. And that's what we fully leverage.
And that's what we're seeing over here on the left. Under the typings folder, you can see you've got Angular, jQuery, and Node now, because that's what we pulled down. So it's not modifying my code in any way. It's sticking in these files in another folder that we can then use to take advantage of them. So that's great. We've done some JavaScript. But what about looking at some JSON? So let's say I wanted to go over and look at some settings in my application. A common thing you do inside of a Mac is just hit Command, comma, and you can bring up your preferences. Well, for us, we've got preferences like, what's the font size of my editor? What's the line height? And there's all sorts of preferences that you can set. So let's say I wanted to do
Actually,
that.
if you scroll down, you see here, there's the schemas, right? Go up a little bit. Yeah, no, sorry. There is down.
JSON schema, where'd you go?
Oh, do quick outline. Do Control-Shift, though. But give the focus. Yeah.
There we go.
Exactly, right? So you see, basically, we have all the schemas behind. We have a schema for Bower. We have a schema for npm package.json for ASP.NET. And you will see that actually in use later on. But that's where all the intelligence for the JSON files comes from schemas.
Ooh, JSC, that's cool.
Oh, we added that, yes.
I got to go exploring more.
It was one of your items in the list, of the 100-item list, right?
Yeah, they called me a distraction, I think. That was good. I like that. I like being a distraction. But let's say I want to be really...
Hot towel distraction.
Hot towel? Yeah. You can't go to a spa without a towel. So let's say you're inside of here and you want to play around and you want to set your own settings. Well, I don't know what they are. I mean, I just started using this tool. So what I could do is I could use IntelliSense right inside of here to say, what else could I change? So let's say I want to change something else like hide cursors over in the ruler. That's great. It's going to change that for me. And then I can use Command up and down arrow to to toggle the change values, and it goes to the different values that are those options.
Who needs dialogues, right?
Exactly. So let's say the editor font size. I can up that guy too. And when I'm done doing that, it should automatically update the font size for me. Or if you really want to play around, you can go to the line height and you can change that to like 5. And your code looks awesome.
It's Beautify. We have an action for that, Beautify. Yeah.
Yes. That's an additional plugin. So there's a lot of cool stuff you can do. That's for setting your different styles up. So that's great. But what about if you're doing something with Bower or with NPM? So let's go ahead and open up the Bower JSON file. And inside of here, let's say I wanted to use a new library, like something with Angular. I can go ahead and pull that up, and it's going to search for it and give me a list of all the different kinds of libraries that match that. So I can type in like Angular Animate, and it automatically puts it in place for me. So that's great. What if I want to go over to my package.json file? So I'm in Node, and maybe I've got gulp in here, but I want to see what versions there are. So I can get rid of those versions, and I'll actually pull up the different versions that I have for libraries too. So I could use those for autocomplete. So the JSON schema is really nice, and it actually helps you figure out what actually should you be putting in these different areas, because you get IntelliSense as you hover over them.
Right. Cool.
So what about less or CSS? Let's go look at a less file. Things like that can work in here too. You get a little color coding, and you can search for things like, let's say I know there's a style for badge. I could do Control F and do badge and find every place that's got it. Or, let's go back to the top of the file. I can come in here now, and I can type in find my symbols, and I can say find all the symbols that's got badge in it. And it'll highlight them for me as I go through them. Well, let's say I'm using less and I have colors, and I want to know every place that the color blue is actually being used. So one thing I can do is I can actually highlight the word I want, and now I can find all the references for color blue inside of my CSS or less file. So I can go click on those, and not only can I see them, but I can actually edit while I'm in here. So I can make changes and do what I need to do, and I can escape and come right back out. So it's very friendly and context sensitive to less, CSS, JSON, everything.
And consistent, right? Because if this language toolbox, the experience should be the same, right? Go to symbol in a CSS file, go to symbol in a JavaScript file, it's the same UI, same experience.
So one last thing, we're still in JavaScript. We've been doing Node, we've been doing client side. We can also have like testing in there. So I have a full CI test pipeline that I like to work with at work. And one of the things I like to do is run a tester. So I have this task using gulp that I'll actually run all my tests through Karma. And I can just run that right here through code, and up pops my testing scenario for me. So everything works just like it does if I was using terminal and just a notepad.
That's really the point. With code, you want to support any workflow you want, right? You don't want to bake them into the tool. So this is a nice example, because John likes Karma, and he can use existing setup, right? So all we do is basically integrate with the tasks that he wrote in the gulp file.
So this is all great, right? We've been using JavaScript the whole way through, but
right.
What do you get when you use TypeScript? Well, let's kill code for a minute. And we'll go back into code, and let's open up a new file. And we've got a demo here using Hot Towel, which I have TypeScriptified, if that's a word. So we've gone through it and basically made everything be TypeScript. So just a quick example, if I go into my files up here, and I type in dashboard, and I can go down and look for my controller, you can see this is actually TypeScript code for my controller using Angular. So it all works the same as the other application, but let's say I'm in here, and what I want to do is I want to see my TypeScript, and then I want to compile over to JavaScript. Well, one thing I can do is I can pop over here into the Explorer, and I can command-click on the JavaScript file, and now opens them side by side. So I've got these two files. And let's say I didn't want to do these ones here. I can open up new files. We'll go to an admin controller, a little less code to look at. And then we'll do the JavaScript file. So I've got both these guys side by side, and I have a gulp task, again, that's actually going to compile my TypeScript. So two things have to work for me to make this happen. One, I've got to enable autosave. And I don't know about you, but once I learned about autosave in editors, I never turned back. It saved me about 300 Command S's every day. So you only get so many clicks in your lifetime.
The team loves this feedback, right? Because they were really disappointed when we decided by default we turn autosave off.
Yes.
Because it can surprise people, so they love this feedback.
So I love that it's there for me, and I want to run this gulp task. So one thing I can do, if I open up the file, we've got him. Now I want to open up my gulp task to actually run. So I'm going to run a task, and it's called TS Watcher. And then it's going to run this output. It's actually going to sit there and wait for me to make a change to the TypeScript. So once again, I'll open up the JavaScript file, so it's there. And let's say I make a change up here. And first thing I'll do is I'll just delete some characters. Autosave will kick in, and the task is running, but it's not actually changing anything because I have syntax errors. So let's put that back, and now let's add a line of code in here. I could do this logger. I could say .info. Eric is awesome even when I spell his name wrong.
And not even pronounce it right.
But you notice it's happening on the right-hand side as I'm typing this. Over here, we've got the same code over there. Now it's compiling it for me on the fly. And if I delete that, we've got everything we need as well.
Maybe a point to make, right? This is an external task, a gulp task that does the compilation. And also, if there are errors from the gulp task, there's a way from the TypeScript compilation. We get the errors back, and at the bottom left, you see kind of the error indication. We have now 2 warnings. If you click quickly, maybe on the...
Yep, I'll add some more there, so we can click on the warnings.
And then you see kind of how we extract them from the running compiler.
And if you want to get the warnings and you're in the palette up here, you can just go ahead and put in the bang. You can see your warnings, and you can toggle through them. Or something Eric taught me was you can hit F8 and actually go one by one through the different markers that are in the file. So I can see this warnings or the errors. It's telling me I need to make sure I type my TypeScript correctly.
Actually, you remind me here at the bottom, you see the source maps thing for TypeScript. So we're very close to have that. So but we pulled it out for the preview, but we will add TypeScript debugging support real soon. Yeah.
So this is all great. But I was thinking, what are the basic things you need in an editor to get around from one place to the other? Something that really frustrates me with a lot of the other editors I've used is it's hard to navigate, and I missed what I had in Visual Studio. So let's say instead of going into the debugging, we'll go into this dashboard. I've got this controller. It's all TypeScript. And notice that it's using a data service. So it's calling from a controller over to a Angular factory to make my calls to the back end. Well, I've got multiple files that are related to each other. So the next thing I want to do is I want to open up a second file to show the data service for a moment. And you do have to be able to spell the thing. There we go. So it's relating from one file to the other. If I want to get from one to the other, there's different ways I can do that. I can open up the file, or let's say I didn't know where it was. I can come down to the data service on the message count, and I can start using the different features to get from one place to the other. Like, I can peek at my code. So now I'm in my controller, and I'm peeking at the data service in another file. And I can actually make edits in here, too, and make changes to that. And if I want to go to that file, I can just click on the title of it, and it opens that file up and goes right to it. If I want to go back, I can go back in the history using Command-O twice. So I can navigate around quite a bit. But let's say that I navigated there again. So I'll go back and peek at him. And let's say I'm back inside of my dashboard, or my data service. So I'm looking at the data service, and there might be multiple places that these functions are used. One of the things I have is this get message count. Another one's a get people. If I want to find all the places that they're out there, I can do find all references. So for that, if I actually click on them,
use the context menu.
I'll use the context. Sometimes I forget the keystrokes. There we go. So I can do find all references, boom. And up
actually,
there, I see everything.
That's now final reference in TypeScript. Maybe show quickly what enables that. And TypeScript in 1.4 added the tsconfig.json. Why don't you quickly go to the Explorer and we quickly open that? And then you see basically is a little meta information about the project, and it doesn't include any file information, but that's how you add the meta information, which for TypeScript building across IDEs, right? And of course, we leverage that. And what you do here, you say no implicit any true, which is very good. So we get warnings when you get no typings. And you see you can also add the files in here. We have a scheme over there. If you do Control space, you should get the files.
Right, so if I do that, and we can see we can add files.
We can have files. There's another thing where you can explicitly enumerate which files are part of your project. When you do find all references, it will only look into these files and consider those the extent of your project. Okay?
Yeah, so we've got quite a bit that we can show through there. And then really, one thing I really loved about this is you can search for anything. So let's close all the files and say I wanted to look for, I know I have a logger somewhere in my application. I can actually go up there and look for all these different things that I have. So I can start typing in like dashboard or data service. It's easy to find files, symbols, errors, tasks, pretty much anything I want to, all through the same editor. So for me, it's been really nice because I can get around the application fast. I've been very productive. I think Eric gave me too much credit. I've only been using this for about a week with the new key bindings, and it's been really, really fun to dive into here, and appreciated being able to do this.
Cool. So that covers Node, JavaScript, TypeScript, Angular. Let's go on to the next demo. Which is actually from Chris Gaius. He is kind of our PM, and in his demo segment, he will cover ASP.NET.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Great demo. Thank you, John. It's a tough one to follow up. We'll see what we can do. Okay, so
do you know as many key bindings as he does?
I do not. I'm a mouse guy, so you brought my mouse. So we want to talk about building applications or building ASP.NET 5 applications on the .NET execution environment that runs cross-platform. And Node, JavaScript, TypeScript applications, and ASP.NET 5 applications are kind of the two main scenarios that we support in the preview timeframe. I just want to kind of start really the foundation for ASP.NET 5 applications. We get a lot of tweets over yesterday and last night sort of asking questions about what do you need to do to get set up for that. So I thought maybe we just start right at the ASP.NET home GitHub page and so just give you a quick overview of what you need to do to get started building ASP.NET 5 applications. So here you are. If you're on Windows, it's a very simple command script or PowerShell script, which will go out to their repository for ASP.NET, pull down a script, and then install the runtime for you. If you are on the Mac, like we are today, on the Mac you need Mono, a version of Mono installed in order to run ASP.NET v5 applications. On Windows, of course, you have the .NET Framework installed, so you don't need Mono, but on the Mac and on Linux, you do. And so the easiest way to do this is to go and use Homebrew and follow these 3 quick steps, tap the DNX repository, update your formula, and then install the .NET Version Manager. And what that will do is install Mono 4.0.1 and it'll install ASP.NET. So we've done that on the machine, and to know if you're good to go, you just type in Mono version, 2 dashes, version, and you can see we've got Mono 4.0.1, and then of course if we do dnvm list, we can see that we've got 2 runtimes installed on the machine. One is the beta 4 runtime, which is the currently released bits that came out here at the build time frame. And then another version, which is the beta 5 version, which is kind of the unstable bleeding edge dev nightly builds. We're not going to do that. You can see that on this machine, the active one is the beta 4 runtime. So everything that we do will use the beta 4 runtime. So that's kind of the foundation just to figure out how to get started with ASP.NET. Now, one of the things that John and Eric had talked about is, we don't have big file, new dialogues, and all that stuff inside Visual Studio Code. What we want to do is leverage existing tools to sort of start building our applications. And so one of the cool tools that's out there is this tool called Yeoman, and it's a scaffolding application or a task running application. And there's a generator for ASP.NET. So I can come in here and say, yo, ASP.NET, yo for Yeoman. And I'm going to tell it to build or use gulp files during this generation process. So I run this. What we're going to do is we're going to go scaffold this application. So Yeoman is kind of this command line interface, and it lets me build empty apps, console apps. All these different types of applications are running on ASP.NET v5. So we'll just do a web application, and we're going to take the default name. So it just comes and asks me a few questions. We'll say, yeah, we'll do a web application. And you can see here it went out and it scaffolded and created all of these files for me. If we go into the web app folder and take a look at it, those are all the files. You can see there's a gulp file that we asked it to create as well. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start Visual Studio Code. And I've created a shortcut, I guess a shortcut's the right term on the Mac, called Code, which lets me launch it from any place inside the terminal. And on our website, there's a little snippet of code of how you can update your bash profile to add this to your machine. Makes it much easier. So when we do that, we're going to open up Visual Studio Code, and we'll get going from there. And the first thing that happens is we get an error.
Well, because we haven't resolved the dependencies, right? It's all package dependencies. Are this defined in the project.json?
Right. So the project.json is the thing that lists out all the different packages that we need. And so what the tool says, hey, you need to go and restore. And if we had actually followed the instructions here from the Yeoman generator, it said to run dnu restore. So we can just do that, dnu restore. And what this will do, and it's all cached on my machine, but it'll go and pull down all the packages for me. And at the end of that restore process, it'll actually go and run bower install and npm install. Now that we've got sort of the application.
Actually, in the project JSON, right, you specify that you want to do a pre and post script running.
Yeah, I mean, we can take a look at it, right? So we'll start up the tool again. If we look at the project.json, these are all the assemblies that I needed to restore for this application. And down here at the end, you can see, let me scroll up, zoom in a little bit. I can press Command+, and we'll zoom in the environment a little bit. You can see after restore, we told this package.json tells, project.json, I'm sorry, tells the tool to run npm install and bower install. So it gets our application all set up properly.
What's interesting, right? The server is package managed, the client is package managed, right? And the tools are package managed, right?
Exactly. So once we do that, we can come in to startup C# file. And for ASP.NET 5 applications, startup CS is kind of the class that gets loaded first. And without having to do anything at this point, I can just come in here and start typing, right? So I can type in end, which is the parameter for the hosting environment. It's injected into my constructor. And I get rich IntelliSense against that, as I would expect.
Stop one thing. You see the flame at the bottom. That is the OmniSharp icon. But even more important, on the right, you see that we discovered one project as the context.
Right, right. And if I click on that, it'll jump us back to the project.json file, which says this is the one that's loaded. We'll do multiple projects in a minute. Then we'll be able to see, I think, a little bit better what happens when we do that. So, like I said, we're back here, and I was programming against the environment variable. I can program against the framework, so I can say system.console, spell correctly. I can do, camel casing WL, and we'll say env dot, and again, the environment name. And, right out of the box, we get straight IntelliSense for managed code, which is really cool. But it's not just contained to a single file. What Eric had talked about earlier is our top-level languages, C# and TypeScript. We understand for the project context, so I can program against the entire folder structure that I've got here. So if I want to do something like dim m as new models, and this will list all the different models that are in my application.
You made a joke, right?
What's that?
That's Visual Basic, no?
Oh, did I say dim?
Yeah, you said You can get over it, Chris, yeah. At one day, we make a great Visual Basic environment for you.
I am never.
We add it to the backlog, right?
I'm never going to live this one down. All right, so we're going to go create a new model in here. We're going to call it DevTool. That's fantastic. And so I'm going to try to write some C# now.
Be careful.
But I'm going to use some snippets, so I can type namespace, and this is in the web application.models namespace. I'm going to create a public class. We'll call it DevTool, and we'll create a public property. I can, again, use another snippet. We'll say property. We could do a fully backed one or an automatically implemented one. We'll say string. We'll call it tool name. And we'll press Alt-Shift down. We'll duplicate that line, and we'll do another property here, and we'll call this Twitter handle. All right, so we created this class. I'm not going to save it or anything. I'm going to quickly go back over to my startup CS. And once I do that, I can say var dt equals new models.devTool, which is the class we just created. And of course, I get great IntelliSense experience against that as we expect. So we can say, yeah, tool name is VS Code. And we can say that dt.Twitter handle is equal to @code, which is very cool. So cool, right? So I get this. Not only do we get great IntelliSense, again, like we saw with TypeScript, if I hold down the Command key and I hover, I get a preview over the code that's backing that. So I can see what the DevTool class looks like. If I want to navigate to it, I can click on it. You can see that we understand the references between these classes. And so I've got one reference to the DevTool class and to the variables, the properties. And if I click on that, we go back, we can see the peak. Again, the same pattern, the same experience that we saw with TypeScript and JavaScript, because we're using the same sort of infrastructure in the back end and giving a similar experience on the front end inside the IDE, inside the environment. So I can just double click here, and we'll jump back over to the startup class. Now, so that's sort of cross-file, cross-project IntelliSense. How are we doing on time? Are we good?
We're still okay.
All right, so let's do one more thing, right? We can not only do IntelliSense across files in my project, we can also do IntelliSense across multiple projects in what we'll call a solution. So let's go back to the project.json file. And like we saw before with Node and Bower, again, we can come in here and, of all the different assemblies that we need to do, I can press Control Space, and we'll go out and we'll look out in NuGet, and we'll get the list of assemblies that we could possibly use. Like there's one utilities that we could pick, and again, we get the same thing with version numbers. So a consistent experience across the board for doing this type of stuff. So I'm going to do a reference to another project, which we'll create in a second. It'll just be called class library, library, and we don't have to specify a version. And when I save this, what should happen is we see that the tool understands that project.json changed again. And so when project.json changes, you have to update all of your references and reload the project. So let's do that in a second. Let's do save all, and we'll close. And I'm going to go and scaffold out a new console application. So we'll use Yeoman again, Yeoman ASP.NET, and we'll say a gulp file again. And we'll choose a class library this time. And it'll create it, again, in this particular folder. And we'll follow the instructions this time. We'll say dnu restore, and this will go fix up our references. And instead of opening up Visual Studio Code in the subfolder, we'll open up at this root level. So I'll just say code dot, and it's going to open up this particular folder. And now you see that we've got a little prompt down here. It says pick a project, right? Because we found multiple project.jsons across this folder hierarchy.
So we want to preserve the folder experience, but make it just context aware.
Right. So I'll choose web application. And what this will do is go and says, OK, now I understand that there are two projects because one references the other. And we've got the class library, and we can see class 1 has been built. And if I go over here to startup.cs, then we can start actually accessing that. So I can say var c equals new class library, right, and class 1. Okay, so not only do I get cross-file IntelliSense and code navigation, but I also get cross-project, all based on a file and folder-based project system. I didn't have to manage any projects or do anything like that. It all happens for me, which is very cool. Okay, so one of the things that John got to do was cool quick fixes, but I don't have
light bulbs? No
yes.
light bulbs?
Anything we can do here?
Yeah, we feature flagged it, right? So there's a feature flag, actually, if you go to settings.
All right.
So this we feature flagged it because these code actions are backed by nRefactor. And at some point we thought we are optimistic we can run all on core CLR. And of course, nRefactor doesn't run on core CLR. For this reason, we kind of feature flagged it. But we can enable it for the demo, just that you're not too jealous against
so
John.
What do I do?
C# code actions true.
C# code actions true. All right, save that.
Quick reload.
After reload, so we can do reload window. Oops, nope, not that one. Reload window. Save, yes. Oh, didn't reload here. Let's go with that again. And so now, when we go into startup.cs, we should get some light bulbs. So var message equals Chris or something. All right. Ooh, I did see a light bulb here. There's my light bulb. So I can do things like now split local variable. I can do explicit typing. So now it understands that message was a string. That's cool. What else can we do?
Create a method.
Create a method.
This dot blah, blah, right?
All right. Let's see. Let's do
create code from unknown reference.
Log info. Oops. Info. Hello. All right. I saw the light bulb. There we go. I can press Command dot. We can do a create method. So that'll generate the log info method for me. That's very cool. All right. So we're working on code actions?
Right, so the plan is, right, so the Roslyn guys are API wimps as we are. They just think that what they have is not a stable API yet. They're same as we. We don't have an extensibility story right now because we don't think we have the APIs that are stable yet. And the same with Roslyn. So once Roslyn gives the code actions, we remove the feature flag and we give it the full power of Roslyn code actions.
All right, let's finish this up. The thing I want to do, we'll do with log info. We'll say dt.toolname plus has the coolest Twitter handle ever. And we'll say dt.twitterhandle. All right, so then we'll log that message when we start the, oh, I need a semicolon, I mean a parenthesis at the end there. So we'll log this, and let's run this application. Now, to run this application, one of the things that Visual Studio Code will do, again, is interrogate the project.json file, and it looks at the fact that there's a set of commands that are in there, and these are commands to launch the application. So we pull in those commands into the command palette. So I can come in here and say dnx, and you can see the commands that are listed, and of course, we listen for every project that's loaded. So you see restore for class, library, and web app, because both of these projects are loaded. And I can say dnx kestrel. And what Kestrel is a little web server that'll go and launch my application. Uh-oh, I've got a problem with my code. Let's see. I didn't implement what? Log info. Oh, I didn't implement log info. I actually didn't have a problem. I did the right thing. Okay. And what did we say? We said hello. All right. Now let's try it again. dnx kestrel. And this should start up the server for me. OK. Server started. VS Code is the coolest Twitter handle ever. Yes. And if we browse to localhost 5001, this will load up the application that we created. All right, very cool. So we created our application. Let's quickly do a couple other things. We'll stop this. We'll go back over to Visual Studio Code. The last thing I want to do is check this into Git, because I'm going to use Git to deploy it to Azure. So another thing I can do with the Yeoman generator is create a git ignore file. So I can say yo ASP.NET git ignore, and that'll generate that git ignore file for me. You can see it was created. And I go back over here, and here it is. We have syntax colorization for that. So this will exclude all the stuff that we don't want to check in. We have another viewlet over here. We call these things on the left viewlets, and it's the git viewlet. And now with my git ignore, I can say initialize the repository. We'll do our initial commit. And once I do that, and once we're backed by a Git repository, now when I come in here and I make changes to files, let me save that. When I make changes to files, like we can come in here and put some comments in, hello. You can see we show change bars over on the left-hand side, because you understand what the delta is between what's in the repository. And if I save this file, we'll go over here in the Git. We're not seeing our little badge. All right, we'll make one more change here. Let me open up a...
No, you see it's there.
Oh, there we go. Just took a second. Index.cshtml. Let's make a change here so we'll be able to see some stuff that's actually happening when we run the application. So here's a CSHTML file. One of the cool things that we also have is support for Emmet. So I can come in to say div ul li, we'll say 3 times, and hit tab. That'll scaffold that out for us. We'll say Visual Studio Code. We can save that. And once we save it, again, the badge updates over on the left. And we can see these are the files that are changed. I can see the diffs right in line or side by side. I can switch to inline view and see them that way if that's what I like. And this is what we saw earlier with Visual Studio Online. And then I can go and just commit this locally. We'll say demo. And that commits these to my local repository, which is very cool. So now I've got my repository set up. I've got change bars. I can understand what the deltas are. The last thing we want to do with this application is push it off and deploy it to Azure. So I've already created an Azure website, and I've set it up for Git deployment. So all we have to do is come back here and copy the commands that Azure tells me for this website. I can go to the terminal and paste those in. It creates a new remote for Azure, and then we just do a git push Azure master. And what will happen is this will push the repository, and you can see it starts to push it up. And if you look back over here in Azure, the deployment is happening, and it's going to go and it's going to install the ASP.NET. It understands it's the ASP.NET 5, and it'll install the runtimes and push it up to Azure. Yes?
Maybe we have one more minute, right? As you do that, can you go to code.visualstudio.com?
I can.
Because basically now, to conclude, we really like what comes next, right? We made the first preview available, but now we are ready to listen for you, and you want to really get your feedback. Can you click on the connect page, right? So really go there. Give us your ideas on user voice. Become an insider. An insider basically is willing to talk to us, right? Because we really like customer-driven, gosh. what's the new book that we all have in our bookshelves and we have read?
Customer development.
Customer development, right? And that's how we want to do that. So really join there. We have already 600 people that are willing to talk to us. It would be great to have more. So follow our blog, whatever, right? So engage with us. We'd like to hear from you what you do with it and how you like it. Okay, let's conclude with that. And we have 3 more seconds. No, we're
3, 2,
No,
1.
we're done. We're done. So thanks for your attention.
Thank you.